Okay, so when I say the word Viking, what's the first thing that pops into your head? I'm guessing it's probably these huge, fierce warriors with epic beards and, of course, horned helmets, right? Well, today we're going to peel back those layers of legend and get to the truth about who the Vikings really were.
And first things first, let's just get the biggest myth out of the way. Those horned helmets, totally fake. They were actually invented hundreds of years later for an opera. And the idea that they were only raiding all the time, well, that was definitely part of their story, but it was far from the whole picture. The real story is way more complex, and honestly, way more interesting.
To really get a handle on the Vikings, we have to start with their society. You know, it wasn't just some chaotic free-for-all. Their world was actually highly organized, with really clear rules and roles for just about everyone. Let's dive in.
So Viking society was basically broken down into three main groups. At the very top, you had the jarls. These were the powerful nobles and big landowners. Then you had the carls, who were the free people, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and they made up the biggest chunk of the population. And at the bottom were the thralls, who were enslaved people with very, very few rights. For the most part, the class you were born into was the class you stayed in.
So how did they handle laws and arguments? Well, all the free men in a community would gather at a special assembly called the Thing. Seriously, that's what it was called. It was like a town hall meeting and a courtroom all rolled into one. They'd make new laws, settle disputes, and decide punishments. It was actually one of the earliest forms of democracy in that part of the world.
Okay, so we've seen the big picture of their society, but what about daily life? What was it actually like to live back then? To find out, we need to step inside the heart of the Viking world, the Longhouse. This wasn't just a building, it was the center of everything. And when I say longhouse, I mean long. These things were often over 60 feet long. That's about the length of a bowling lane. The reason they were so huge is that they housed the entire extended family, plus any workers they had, and sometimes even their animals.
So picture this. You're living in one giant open room. No walls, no privacy. There's a big fire pit running down the middle for heat and for cooking, and all the smoke just goes out a hole in the roof. People would sit and sleep on long benches built along the walls. And, oh yeah, during the freezing winters, the farm animals were often brought inside to keep them safe and warm.
This brings us to a really important truth about Viking life. For most of them, life wasn't about constant adventure and battle. It was about survival. The vast majority of Vikings were farmers. They spent their days working the land, growing crops, and raising animals. Raiding was more like a seasonal side gig for some, not a full-time career.
So what was on the menu? Well, their diet was pretty simple, and based on what they could grow, raise, or find. They ate a lot of grains like barley and rye, which they'd make into bread or porridge. They got their protein from livestock, and if they lived near the coast, tons of fish. And they'd also go out and gather wild stuff like berries and nuts.
And their clothes? It was all about function. Forget the wild outfits you see in movies. Their fashion was designed for one thing: keeping warm in a pretty cold climate. Men typically wore wool tunics over trousers, and women wore long linen dresses with a kind of wool overcoat that was pinned at the shoulders with brooches. Everything was practical and built to last.
All right, now let's talk about the technology that made the Vikings so legendary. I'm talking, of course, about their incredible ships. These were not just boats. They were masterpieces of engineering that allowed them to travel farther and faster than anyone else at the time.
The secret sauce to their ships was a technique called clinker building. Instead of placing the wood planks side by side, they overlapped them, kind of like scales on a fish, and then fastened them with iron rivets. This created a hull that was both incredibly strong and surprisingly flexible, so it could bend and ride with the ocean waves instead of breaking against them.
This whole design was just brilliant. So you've got the flexible hull from clinker building. Then they added a long, heavy keel along the bottom, which gave the ship amazing stability on the rough open sea. And get this, the ships were symmetrical, meaning the front and back looked the same. This let them reverse directions super quickly without having to turn the entire ship around.
And what's maybe most amazing is that they sailed across vast oceans without a magnetic compass. So how'd they do it? By being absolute experts at reading the natural world. They used the sun and stars, they watched for birds that they knew meant land was near, and they could even check the color of the water. Nature was their GPS.
But here's something you might not know. Not all Viking ships were warships. The famous longship? Yeah, that was the sleek, fast sports car of the sea, built to carry warriors. But the real workhorse was a ship called the Nar. It was much wider and deeper, basically a cargo truck, designed to haul goods for trade.
It just goes to show that their world was as much about commerce as it was about conquest.
So they had this organized society and they had this game-changing technology. Let's pull back and look at the massive impact all of this had on the world through their roles as traders, warriors, and eventually settlers.
With those amazing ships, Vikings became incredible international merchants. They traveled all over, trading things from the north like furs and amber for valuable stuff like silver and spices from places as far away as the Middle East. Their trade network was huge and connected different parts of the world.
And yes, of course, they were also incredible warriors, but their gear might surprise you. You'd think the sword was the go-to weapon, right? Nope. For most Vikings, the main weapon was the spear. Swords were super expensive and were more of a status symbol. Their main defense was a big round shield, and yeah, that powerful battle axe was definitely one of their signature weapons.
And just so we are absolutely 100% clear, let's circle right back to where we started. The actual helmets they wore were simple, practical bowls made of iron or leather designed to, protect their heads. Let's say one more time. They did not have horns. That whole look is a powerful image, but it's a complete myth.
The Viking Age didn't just stop overnight. It was more of a slow fade over about 300 years. A few big things happened. Christianity spread across Europe and slowly replaced the old Norse gods. More powerful kings started creating centralized countries with stronger armies. Raiding just wasn't as easy or profitable anymore. And eventually, many Vikings just settled down in the lands they'd explored, blending into the local cultures.
So, the classic Viking Age did come to an end, but their influence, it's all around us today, in our language, in the trade routes they created, and even in the DNA of people across Europe. So it kind of makes you wonder, even though their long ships aren't sailing anymore, did the Viking influence ever really go away?